All right, welcome everybody. My name is John Hollica. I think most of you all know me, but I'll just say that I'm a professor of visual arts here at the University of San Diego and one of the organizers of the Spring 2025 Teaching on Palestine. And I want to start our event by acknowledging that I stand as a grateful guest on the unceded land of the Kumeyaay Nation. And I declare that wherever I live or visit on this continent, I humbly recognize that I'm a guest on the native lands of sovereign nations. I also acknowledge that as an immigrant to this land, I'm the beneficiary of a long and cruel history of settler colonial violence, land theft, dehumanization, and genocide that continues to impact the native people of this continent. And as a Palestinian American who struggles against the colonization of my ancestral land, I'm deeply troubled by the irony of also being a settler on other people's native land. And I seek the guidance and the wisdom of our indigenous sisters and brothers in being a caring steward of this land. So I want to thank you all for being here and for your willingness to learn, to engage, and with one of the most critical topics of our time. This is the Spring 2025 teaching. We started doing this in the fall of 2023. This is our 10th event of this teaching. I'm very glad that you're here. So we started to organize these events in response to in November 2023 in response to the genocide that started in Gaza in October 2023. And the teaching is organized by the Southern California Educators for Palestine, a coalition of faculty and alumni from 6 Southern California universities and colleges. And our goal is to provide our communities with a series of educational events from multiple perspectives, both academic and cultural. We aim to create spaces for complex learning, for honest reflection, and respectful dialogue that will encourage us to think critically about our relationship to what is taking place in Palestine. I want to thank members of our coalition for their work to help advance the cause of justice in Palestine and for their empathy and solidarity with the struggle of the Palestinian people. Also want to thank the University of San Diego for providing the physical and intellectual space to hold this teaching. And I want to thank the audience for showing up to learn. And you should never forget that saying that the world is ruled by those who show up. So I will introduce our guests in a minute, but first I want to briefly mention a few upcoming events in the Spring 2025 teaching. And if you're not on our mailing list and you want to be on our mailing list, I'd be happy to write it down, and I won't send you too many emails, just twice a week to remind you of the events. So the next event is on Monday, April 28th at the Humanities Center here at USD, and it'll take place from 5:30 to 7 p.m. And it's a poetry reading and conversation with the award-winning poet, Lina Tufaha. Lina recently received the National Book Award for Poetry, and we're very much looking forward to have her join our community and to speak about her work and be in conversation with Professor Iman Ghanayem, who's sitting in the back and is a member of our coalition. And I think that's Jackie behind her, who's also a member of our coalition, and Kevin, who's also a member of our coalition, and Eric, who's also a member of our coalition, and Ahlam and Bahar. And I want to acknowledge all of these good people because they stand up for justice consistently against a lot of pressure. And Sean, sorry, I didn't see Sean, he's hiding there. I don't know what that was, somebody trying to get in. There's also going to be on May 1st, a screening of the film, The Palestine Exception, that will take place at Manchester Auditorium here on campus in Manchester Conference Room. That event is being sponsored by the USD Palestine Solidarity Committee. And then on May 5th, from 6 to 8 p.m. in Warren Auditorium, which is this place right here, there'll be a panel discussion titled Love in Colonial Times, Key Terms in Contemporary Feminist Solidarities. So I'll be emailing reminders. Again, if you're not on the list and you want to get in there, please let me know. Since we started the teaching in November 2023, the Gaza at USD Coalition, which later evolved into the Coalition of Southern California Educators for Palestine, have so far presented 37 events, educational cultural events. Those events have engaged and informed our communities, have to a large extent normalized serious conversation about Palestine, at least here at USD. And when people praise our sustained educational effort, I remind them that all of those eloquent words and informative talks that took place during these presentations have not managed to feed a single hungry child, to fix a single broken body, or to save a single life in Gaza. But our guest, Dr. Feroze Sidhwa, has done that. And as a volunteer surgeon in Gaza in 2024 and again in 2025, he has saved the lives and mended the shattered bodies of Palestinians who continue to be physically and psychologically traumatized by the ongoing genocide that continues to be inflicted on the civilian population of Gaza. And for that remarkably important and generous effort, we owe him our eternal gratitude. Dr. Feroze Sidhwa practices surgical critical care at San Joaquin General Hospital in French Camp, California. He attended medical school at the University of Texas Medical School in San Antonio and received his master's in public health from Harvard School of Public Health. Dr. Sidhwa has worked as a volunteer trauma and critical care surgeon in several conflict and disaster settings, including Gaza, the West Bank, Ukraine, Haiti, Burkina Faso, and Zimbabwe. Dr. Sidhwa returned from his second tour in Gaza on April 1st or 3rd, I can't quite remember which date. He will discuss his firsthand experiences as a volunteer surgeon within the shattered healthcare system in Gaza. Please join me in welcome Dr. Feroze Sidhwa.
Hi, everyone. Oh, you hear me okay? Yeah. So, so thanks for, what is that? Thanks for inviting me. Oh, that's okay, but it's okay. But yeah, thanks for inviting me. I'm still kind of new to California, but my brother lives down in San Diego, so it's always nice to get an excuse to come down and see him. Uh, so I did like John mentioned, I volunteered in the Gaza Strip from March 25th to April 8th of last year, and then March 6th to April 1st of this year. The first time I went was with PAMA, it's the Palestinian American Medical Association, and the second time was with Med Global, which is also an American NGO. They feed physicians and nurses and others into the what's called the emergency medical teams mechanism of the World Health Organization, and the WHO has an interesting constitution that's worth reading, but part of it, there's a kind of a boilerplate statement, and it just says the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health is one of the fundamental rights of every human being without distinction of race, religion, political belief, economic or social condition. Most people would agree with that without much controversy. But I think the more interesting part of it says that the health of all peoples is fundamental to the attainment of peace and security, and is dependent on the fullest cooperation of individuals and states. And I always took that individuals and states part to heart. It makes sense, and it's part of the. I've tried to incorporate that into my professional work in my life. So the most important, or not the most important, really, the only book in English, at least, about the political history of Gaza starts off with the words, "This book is not about Gaza. This book is about what has been done to Gaza." And similarly, we need to understand what has been done to Gaza to understand what happened on October 7th of 2023 and then afterwards. So what is Gaza? Well, first of all, it's an incredibly small place. It's about the size of metropolitan Philadelphia. It's the length of a marathon and the width of a quick jog, quite literally. Overall, Gaza is incredibly densely populated. Before this, again, all this is before October 7th. Overall, it was more densely populated than Boston. The north, Gaza City and its environs, Beit Lahia and places like that, was more densely populated than New York City, and obviously without the height of New York's buildings or its municipal resources. Gaza is incredibly poor, and it has been since 2014. About 50% of the population was unemployed, about 60% of the youth were unemployed, and about 80% of people were dependent on humanitarian aid for bare survival. And importantly, this was not a new development. This had been the case. This extreme level of poverty, leaving aside the poverty that came before it, was the case since what was called Operation Protective Edge in 2014, which, as Sarah Roy, who we'll talk about more in a second, describes as dealing something of a death blow to Gaza's economy. Gaza is 70% refugees and their descendants. In 1948, the 250,000 people were expelled from Palestine, the newly created state of Israel, into the Gaza Strip, overwhelming the about 80,000 indigenous people who actually lived in that area of land. Prior to that, the Gaza Strip was not a territorial entity. It doesn't, like, actually even now in Gaza, when you talk to people, if they say I'm from Gaza, they don't mean they live in the Gaza Strip. They mean they're from Gaza City. People who are from Khan Yunis say I'm from Khan Yunis. People who are from Rafah say I'm from Rafah. And most people, in fact, say I'm from Lod. I'm from Jerusalem. I'm from places that are actually outside. But now I live in Beit Lahia. So it's really not. Gaza itself is not a territorial entity, and the day-to-day conversation kind of reinforces that on a regular basis. Gaza is also a very young place. I don't know if it's the youngest in the world, but it's certainly amongst them. 15% of people are under the age of 5, 40% are under age 15, half are under 18, and almost nobody is over the age of 60. Like I said, it's a very, very young place. Historically, Gaza has been a stiff source of resistance to the Israeli occupation, both armed and unarmed. Israel conquered the Strip in 1967. It was under Egyptian military control prior to that, and began an intensive campaign led by Ariel Sharon, who later became the prime minister of the state. He was at the time the head of the IDF Southern Command. By 1971, Israel had broken what the armed resistance in Gaza, the Fedayeen resistance. In 1987, the first Intifada started in Gaza, and it was an overwhelmingly nonviolent mass action, but was met with tremendous repression. The details are really quite shocking. The Intifada was repressed by 1993. In 2000, the second Intifada broke out, also initially overwhelmingly nonviolent, and it was repressed by 2004. Israel withdrew its settlers and military forces from the Strip that same year and redeployed them to Gaza's periphery, essentially turning it into what David Cameron, the British Prime Minister, called an open-air prison. Others have referred to it as a concentration camp throughout history. Thereafter followed periodic Israeli attacks on Gaza to quell resistance to the ongoing occupation and the subsequent siege and blockade. The list is quite long. You'll see it in a moment. And then, as I mentioned, Gaza has been under what's called military occupation in one form or another since 1948, initially under Egyptian occupation and 1967 under Israeli military occupation. And what that's meant for the territory is pretty well captured in these four resources, if anyone's interested. The first at the top left is a report from the UN OCHA. It came out in 2017 and discusses the humanitarian impact of the occupation over 50 years, from 67 to 2016. The second is a book written by Edith Zertal and Akiva Eldar. The first is an Israeli historian at the Institute of Jewish Studies at the University of Basel in Switzerland, and the other is the chief political economist and editorial writer for Haaretz, which is Israel's most important newspaper. It covers another major aspect of the occupation, which is the settlement enterprise and the systematic forced displacement of the Palestinians that it entails. The third, at the bottom left, is about the third major dimension of the occupation, which we'll talk about a bit more. It's the slow and steady destruction of the Palestinian economy, with the obvious effects that such a project would have when sustained over generations and applied to an entire society. The book is written by Sarah Roy. She's Harvard's and certainly the world's leading expert on Gaza. And she's also the daughter of Holocaust survivors. The fourth book is a standard Arab-Israeli conflict history written by Israel's leading historian, a pretty right-wing guy named Benny Morris. But he notes, I'm quoting him, like all occupations, Israel's was founded on brute force, repression, and fear, and the Palestinians, like all occupations, were founded on violence, suffering, and destruction. This is the collaboration and treachery, beatings and torture chambers, and daily intimidation, humiliation, and manipulation. He went on, noting, and quoting again, the protracted state of political subjugation and economic dependence and the day-to-day realities of military occupation meant a continuous trampling of the basic rights and dignity of the inhabitants of the occupied territory. Israeli propagandists tried to project an image of an enlightened occupation, but in fact, it was always a brutal and mortifying experience for the occupied, as well as a brutalizing experience for the occupiers, meaning the Israelis. Uh, Gaza has been subjected to what I just mentioned a moment ago with Sarah Roy's book called De-development. It's a unique process that's happened in world history. No other place has really undergone this. The phrase was coined by Sarah Roy, who I mentioned, and in words she wrote about 30 years ago, quoting again, despite its contentious and distinctive history, Gaza has consistently been neglected by Middle East scholars. However, it's important to examine the strip because it provides a stark clarification of the intentions as well as the consequences of Israeli policy. Gaza reveals poignantly the lineament and the texture of Israel's occupation, its harsh exterior and banal underside, its unique form and particularistic substance. Gaza dispels the myriad myths and illusions consistently invoked to legitimize Israeli control and depicts the bleakness of the future in which control is allowed to persist. And I think the way she phrased that is very important, in which that control is allowed to persist because we are the ones that in fact allow it. Anyone who wants to know what this tiny, crowded patch of land was on October 6th really should read that this third edition of the Gaza Strip and probably read it twice. And Gaza is also under what's called military blockade, which again is actually quite unique in the world for an entire territory. And I stress this was before the October 7th attacks. Since 2007, the Strip has been under a land, sea, and air blockade. It's been in place for 16 years now. And this has had an enormously destructive impact on the standard of living, as one might expect. It has completely destroyed Gazan society's ability to provide to itself the necessities of life. If anybody wants to read about it, again, these two books are certainly the most important ones. The first is the one that I mentioned by Roy. The book on the right is by a political scientist named Norman Finkelstein, who also happens to be the child of Holocaust survivors. So, in summary, on October 6th of 2023, Gaza was unique. It was a compact, remarkably poor, incredibly young, highly repressed occupied territory subjected to economic de-development and outright blockade, a process that had played out over about 57 years, which is longer than almost everyone there had been alive. The large majority of the Strip's population has never known anything beyond the harshest phase of this history, which is the blockade and the periodic military assaults on Gaza since 2004. Just to illustrate how little these things are covered in the Western press generally, but especially the American press, that last one over on the right, Operation Shield and Arrow, that's not the Israeli response to the October 7th attacks. That's called Operation Swords of Iron. Operation Shield and Arrow was a bombing campaign in Gaza in May of 2023 that almost nobody's ever even heard of. In fact, I don't think it's ever been mentioned in the coverage of the October 7th attacks. So if Gaza was unique before October 7th, since then it's really become a different planet. Gaza is the deadliest place in the world for civilians and aid workers, according to the International Rescue Committee and plenty of others. Today, Gaza is once again the most dangerous place in the world to be a child. That's according to UNICEF. And I stress the once again aspect of it because in 2008 and 9, during Operation Cast Lead, Gaza was the most dangerous place in the world to be a child. In 2014, during Operation Protective Edge, Gaza was the most dangerous place in the world to be a child. And today, the same is occurring. More journalists, there was just a study, I should probably change the reference. There was just a study that came out from the Watson Institute at Brown showing that more journalists have been killed in Gaza than World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the entire American war in Indochina, and the entire war on terror combined. That is a shocking, absolutely shocking fact that is just beyond it's very hard to comprehend such a differential between this tiny, tiny place and the rest of the world. Gaza has been physically destroyed far worse than Aleppo in Syria, Mariupol in Ukraine, or even Dresden and Rotterdam during World War II. The current estimates are that there are 47 million tons of rubble in Gaza. Actually, that estimate is from July of last year. So it's quite a bit more now. And that it will take about 10 to 15 years just to clear the rubble away in Gaza. For one reason is because of its sheer volume, but another reason is because it's contaminated with human remains, animal remains, and a huge amount of unexploded ordnance. Gaza is the thirstiest place in the world, and by a huge margin. This is not a well understood phenomenon, even to people who are paying close attention. Since October 7th, Oxfam is the major NGO in the world that monitors water problems. Only 4.7 liters of water per person per day have been available in the Gaza Strip. That's not for drinking, that's for all purposes: cooking, cleaning, drinking, toileting, etc. Uh, when the report was written, there were 500,000 people concentrated in the Mawasi. That's the western edge of Gaza. That's basically a strip of beach. And Oxfam estimated that for those 500,000 people, there were about 2.5 liters of water per person per day available and 120 toilets for 500,000 people. After the report was written, Israel concentrated another million people into this area. So for that time period and what's being repeated now, there were about 1.4 liters of water per person per day available. And for 1.1.5 to 1.8 million people, there were 120 toilets. It's just absolutely outrageous numbers that don't exist anywhere else. 100% of sewage and water processing quality plants, excuse me, 100% of sewage and water quality plants have been destroyed in Gaza. 70% of sewage pumps have been destroyed in Gaza. The rest are offline due to a absolute fuel embargo. And 67% of water, sanitation, and hygiene infrastructure has been destroyed. And again, these are, you know, reports obviously cover what happened in the past. Every day, more and more is being destroyed. Gaza is also the hungriest place in the history of the modern world, which again, I know seems like a shocking statement because we typically think of famines as happening in Africa. Nevertheless, it's clearly true. And this is readily apparent when you're there. It's very obvious how hungry people are. Just an anecdotal example. I arrived on March 6th, and the Israelis had closed the border again to all traffic. Nothing has come in or out of Gaza since March 2nd. Literally nothing. I ate goat that night. It's Ramadan, right? People are trying to impress the foreigners by serving them nice things. So we ate goat that night. I literally it wasn't served an animal protein again until March 29th. Like that's how long. Now, again, I don't mind. I can survive without meat for a few weeks, no big deal. But this is a meat eating culture, and it's Ramadan. People are trying to celebrate, and this was the level of deprivation. And we were eating better than anyone else in the territory because, of course, we're foreigners and we have money. But nevertheless, even according to the actual data, this is true. This is the latest summary from the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification. It's the technical group that monitors food insecurity in the world. And just in case anybody's wondering, it's funded by the United States, the European Union, the UK, Australia, and Canada. So it's hardly a radical organization. The IPC divides food insecurity at the household level into 5 phases. Phase 3 and above is when mortality increases. So that's what they usually refer to when they talk about the level of food insecurity, the P3 plus phases of food insecurity. If their estimates from in September and October are correct, what it would indicate is that 145 people have died every day due to starvation related causes in Gaza. And if their projections for the future period, which just finished, turned out to be correct, that would imply that about 200 people a day, 193, have been dying of starvation related causes in Gaza. And just to emphasize, the border has been completely and hermetically sealed since March 2nd. And furthermore, it's actually quite likely, because of the age structure of Gaza's population, because it is so young, it's actually likely that the numbers I just read out are underestimates, because children under the age of 5 and especially newborns die of malnutrition far faster than adults do. They have much less ability to tolerate it. Gaza is probably the most wounded place in the world. Hard to find comparative statistics on that exactly, but I just can't think of even a remotely close second example. The current estimates by the World Health Organization is that there's 1,000 pediatric amputees in Gaza. I cannot imagine that's not off by an order of magnitude. It's got to be far, far higher. Just at European Hospital, when I was there the year before, last year, there were about 100 just in this one hospital, leave aside the ones that had already been discharged, were at other hospitals, et cetera, et cetera. It's just completely, again, just a totally unprecedented situation. And finally, Gaza has undergone certainly the most direct and sustained attack on a healthcare system in the history of warfare. And I mean that going back to the beginning of human history, not just to World War II. About 1,000 healthcare workers have been killed in Gaza, not aid workers, but specifically healthcare workers. That's 5% of the workforce, 1 out of 20. And incidentally, for some reason that I'm not sure, paramedics are not included in these counts. If you added that, it would be about another 100, from my understanding. Most of Gaza's hospitals have been attacked and destroyed at some point. Most of them have been rebuilt afterwards. 81% of primary healthcare clinics have been destroyed. And I don't want to personalize things too much, but for example, Nasser Medical Complex, where I was working on March 23rd, was bombed directly. The Israelis made no pretense of not having committed the act. They were quite proud of it. One of my patients, Ibrahim Barhoum, a 16-year-old boy, was killed, and I was actually almost killed because I was on my way to his room to change his bandages because he was going to go home the next day. The geospatial analysis in the British Medical Journal of Global Health found no distinction between hospitals and the rest of the Strip in the first month, or excuse me, found no distinction between bombings of hospitals and all other structures in the Gaza Strip in the first month of the attack. And according to the United Nations Humanitarian Data Exchange, which tracks attacks on healthcare, and I just wrote a paper about this, so the numbers are fresh in my mind. About 2.5 times more healthcare workers have been killed in Gaza than in Ukraine, right? So that's already kind of shocking, 2 times more, right? But remember, Gaza is a territory of 2.2 million people, and Ukraine's a country of 39 million people. If you adjust for the length of conflict, about 36 months in Ukraine and about 15 months in Gaza, and you adjust for the size of the population, the rate of killing of healthcare workers in Gaza is 110 times higher than it is in Ukraine. The percentage of healthcare workers imprisoned in Gaza is 200 times higher than in Ukraine. And the rate of incidents obstructing or denying access to healthcare, in other words, how often was a hospital blocked and people couldn't get to it, is almost 300 times higher in Gaza than Ukraine. 2 orders of magnitude difference between Ukraine, which was the worst country in the world for attacks on healthcare prior to October 7th of 2023, compared to Gaza. So let's talk about how all these factors that I mentioned contributed to 2 specific cases. So the first is a case of a 9-year-old girl. I've taken out the most graphic images, but just keep in mind there are pictures of a wounded little girl in this video. Her name was Juri. She was injured in an explosion about 2 weeks before I met her. At the time, an external fixator, that's the bar and pins that go on the outside of a limb to keep it rigid so that a bone can heal, that had been placed, and her wounds had been closed primarily, which turned out to be a really bad idea. So this is Juri. You can see, I don't know if the mouse will show up. Nope, doesn't seem to. But if you look at the picture on the left, you can see the puffiness of her eyelids and the kind of bowing in of the temporalis muscle on the right side of her head. And this girl is quite malnourished. And when I met her, she actually was rolled into the preoperative area for no reason that I could figure out. Nobody knew who she was. I couldn't figure out who had booked the case, but the nurse there, I was the only person there. So the nurse asked me if I could do her case. And I said, well, no, I can't just operate on a 9-year-old girl without having talked to somebody about it first or knowing why she needs an operation. But we looked at her more closely. And she was dying. She was actually probably like a few hours away from dying. Her heart rate was about 170. Her blood pressure was so low that it was undetectable. I actually couldn't even feel a radial pulse. I could only feel a pulse in her neck. And she was completely confused. I actually thought she was 4 or 5 years old just because of the way she was acting. So we said, okay, look, we couldn't find her, any of her family to talk to them. So we said, look, it's better, we shouldn't just let her die because we can't find her family. So we gave her a bunch of IV fluids to bring her blood pressure up, anesthetized her without killing her, which did take some effort, and then we took her to the operating room. So again, the most graphic pictures are not in here, but be warned. So this is what she looked like when she got to the operating room. You can see she's casted up from head to toe. Her right arm is broken. Her right leg is broken. Her left leg, you can just barely see the external fixator on the left side, and you can see that that wound on the back of her leg certainly doesn't look great. Now I blocked out this just because it's not really a medical audience. Normally I'm talking to doctors, but this poor little girl had a humongous wound on the left side of her buttocks. It was so deep that the lowest bones in her pelvis were exposed. On the right side, she also had a deep wound, but not quite that bad. And then on the left, her left leg, was missing almost the entire quadriceps and hamstring muscle. How her legs stayed attached to her, I really have no idea. And it was missing about 2 inches of her femur, the bone, the largest bone in your leg. Her sciatic nerve was gone. Her obturator nerve was gone. It was just a total disaster. Like I said, it was just such a dramatic injury that I couldn't understand how her leg had stayed attached to her. It really didn't make any sense to me. Well, I called over Mark Perlmutter. I called over the British team of plastic surgeons that was there, and the all of us together, 6 surgeons, 3 anesthesiologists, over the next, maybe 10 or 11 days, we were able to put this little girl, at least to stabilize her. We were able to get rid of the huge burden of necrotic tissue that she had. Well, when I called Mark into the room, the first thing he said was, "Who in the fuck did this? Who did this operation? This is terrible. This is terrible work." And so finally, we found out that on the day she came in, the orthopedic surgeon who was supposed to be on call was dead. Well, okay, so that left the residents alone to do this case, and they had no idea what they were doing because I also wouldn't have when I was a resident. It was completely impossible. This little girl needed huge debridements. She needed major interventions, and they just had no idea what to do. So they did the best they could, but it led to this kind of horrendous outcome. Well, over the next, like I said, 10 or 11 days, we were able to actually stabilize her and really improve her situation. We had to actually shorten her femur to bring the 2 gaps of her muscle back together so that it could actually heal. That shortened her leg, so it would be impossible for her to walk like this, obviously, but her sciatic nerve is cut, so she can't walk anyway. And actually, my friends from PCRF actually found her in Egypt. She was medically evacuated to Egypt a few weeks after these operations were done, and now she's doing quite well. Actually, she's healing up, she's improving, but still, she's obviously maimed severely for life. It would be shocking if her left leg doesn't have to be amputated at some point. And if it doesn't get amputated, she will need, and I'm not exaggerating by saying this, about 30 operations in the future throughout the course of her life to make her leg even, as functional as it can be, which won't be very much. So it's a really, it just impresses upon you how one little girl in one explosion, and there's been how many bazillions of them in Gaza, how much effort it takes just to get her back to the point that she can survive, let alone thrive in the environment that she's going to have to return to at some point. Well, the second case is a different one. It's a case of a gunshot wound followed by medical neglect and torture in a 29-year-old man who happened to be an orthopedic surgical nurse. His initial injury was probably in late November of 2023, so just a month after the October 7th attacks, and or maybe 6 or 7 weeks after the attacks. And when I found him, he had osteomyelitis, which is an infection of the bone itself, and also he had persistent sepsis and persistent non-union of his tibia. That's the bone in the lower part of your leg. A ruptured right globe, meaning eyeball, and severe acute protein calorie malnutrition. So this is Tamer. For the people who maybe don't know much about the history of the Gaza Strip, some of it that I just mentioned, it's very hard to appreciate how lucky a young man has to be in this picture in Gaza. Young men in a conservative Arab society don't get married, and you don't get married, or excuse me, who don't have a job don't get married. And like I mentioned, about 60% youth unemployment. That means most men are basically ineligible for marriage. Well, you don't get married, you don't have a family, you don't have a family, you don't have a future in Gaza. Well, Tamer did quite well for himself in high school. He was kind of at the top of his class. And afterwards, he got admitted to the Palestine College of Nursing. He did quite well for himself there. He married, he had these 2 children. These pictures are from his Facebook page. So after he went to the Palestine College of Nursing, he did quite well there as well because he ended up as an orthopedic surgical nurse at the Indonesian hospital in northern Gaza, a very coveted position. Well, in late November, he was finishing an operation in the operating room. He was closing a wound when the Israelis raided Indonesian hospital. They came into the operating room and demanded that he leave the patient and come with them. And he simply said, no, I have to finish closing this wound. The guy can't just stay under anesthesia forever. So they shot him in his leg and left him on the floor. They didn't take him for interrogation. They just left him there. His own surgical colleagues came in, picked him up off the floor, and put this external fixator on him. Now, this is the next day in the hospital. You can see that he's shaken. He's obviously not happy about what happened, but he tries to smile for the camera. He still looks physically well. And this is certainly the kind of physical injury and also traumatic, psychiatric trauma that somebody can get over. Somebody can get over momentary lapses in someone else's recognition of their human dignity. But what happened next to him is very different. After this picture was taken, maybe a day or two later, Tamar was taken. The Israelis raided the hospital again, and Tamar was taken from his hospital room. He doesn't know where, but almost certainly to the Sede Yemen torture chamber that's been reported on. There, he was strapped to a table for 45 days straight. He was blindfolded the entire time. He was fed a juice box every day or every other day. And he was medically neglected so severely that he lost an enormous amount of weight and developed sepsis of that external fixator. In other words, an infection of the external fixator itself. And during that time, he was also beaten so badly that his right eye was torn and had to be removed from his head later. So when he once and then finally he was dumped naked on the side of the road, which is and this is pretty standard treatment for pretty much all of Gaza's prisoners. So when he was released from the hospital, this is what he looked like. You can see that he's lost a tremendous amount of weight. You can see the bandaging of his head, the enucleation of his right eye, the removal of his eyeball, and you can see the weight loss is just incredible. He looks like he's aged about 20 years. And this is what he looked like a week later when I met him. I thought he was an 80-year-old man the first time I met him. He's 29 years old. You know, the external fixator had been removed and a cast had been applied because the physicians taking care of him thought that that was the source of his sepsis. But it turned out that removing the pins wasn't enough. He actually needed debridement of the pin sites where the bone had been drilled into. So that's what Dr. Mark Perlmutter with the betadine in his hand is doing over there, is just cleaning these wounds up. Now, Tamar, and thankfully we had been able to bring antibiotics with us because this was at this time we went through Egypt, which allowed us to bring in medical supplies. Now that you have to go through Israel, you're not allowed to. So when we left, this is what Tamar looked like. Certainly physically better, no doubt about that. And his sepsis had resolved. We had to debride his pin sites 3 or 4 times, but he did improve physically. But mentally and spiritually, he is a completely and totally broken individual. It is impossible for him to sleep. It is impossible for him not to scream out constantly for no reason whatsoever. He has no idea if his wife and children are alive or dead. And he's actually been medically evacuated to Egypt, where he won't let anyone take care of him because he's absolutely convinced that every nurse is an Israeli agent trying to kill him. So this man has just been completely and utterly destroyed. You can't imagine the amount of mental health care and all sorts of other supports that would be necessary to bring this man back to any sort of functional status, let alone to live any kind of happy life. And just to emphasize, this is one of the few men in Gaza, young men in Gaza, who had actually been able to to do something for himself, to actually have a family, to actually get an education, to actually participate in research. He used to participate in technical discussions about how to heal his patients, about how to take care of his, what was the point of doing this? Did this help in the fight against Hamas? It's hard to see how. Well, these cases illustrate a few things to me. Number one, that the healthcare system in Gaza is just massively overwhelmed, both by the enormous needs there, which have resumed since the March 18th widespread bombing resumed, but it's also being overwhelmed by direct attacks on the healthcare system, the workforce, the facilities, and also just the outright blockade, which just doesn't allow anything in, including medical supplies. The destruction of the wash infrastructure, the water sanitation and hygiene infrastructure, and also the massive malnutrition and overcrowding in Gaza are basically making surgical success impossible. We were able to provide advanced care in this extremely resource poor and deprived setting at the individual level. But like I mentioned, it took like 6 surgeons, 10 days to get one little girl healthy enough to be evacuated to Egypt. There are hundreds of thousands of people like her in Gaza, or like Tamar, whichever one you want to choose. So it's possible at the individual level to care for these people, but not at the massive public health wide level that's actually required. Now, the Gazan healthcare system is going to have to be rebuilt if there's going to be any kind of society in Gaza after this. And it's kind of a terrifying thought, but we as Americans are the ones who have to choose what kind of society will be in Gaza. The people in Gaza don't really have any say in the matter. If we give them the option, they'll build a healthy society, but that's our choice. I think these two pictures illustrate kind of clearly what that choice is. They're both from European Hospital when I was there. The first one was behind, or the one on the left was from behind a nurse's station in the kind of outlying area of the hospital where I stayed or where I slept. It says, "Enter this place with love and leave us with a beautiful smile." Then the Arabic says the same thing, at least according to Google Translate. And the other one was right outside of Jury's room. It says, "In Gaza, we don't care anymore about anything." Someone's just scrawled it on the wall. You can understand the cynicism for sure, but again, we are the ones. It's not the people of Gaza just have no say in whether or not they'll be able to choose between these two options. We are the only ones that can give them the option to choose, and I assure you, they will choose the one on the left if we give them that choice. This is a picture of Mahmoud Abu Nijala with his three children. He was a Palestinian general surgeon who was working for Doctors Without Borders when he was killed in an airstrike on Al-Awada Hospital on November 21st of 2023. He was in the doctor's lounge when it was blown up. His wife actually lives in Britain, from what I understand, and so do his three children. After the Israelis finished destroying the hospital, this whiteboard, it's an operating room whiteboard that tells you which cases are going to go that day. It says it was found with his signature, and it says whoever stays until the end will tell the story. We did what we could. Remember us. Well, an ethicist at the University of Sussex in Britain asked, who caused the scarcity? You'll see what she means in a minute. These questions are within the remit of this discipline, meaning the discipline of medical ethics. We did what we could are the words of doctors operating under conditions of extreme and devastating scarcity. There are regrettably many other situations of incursion, occupation, and genocide in which healthcare infrastructure is targeted. And she goes on to point out that when she asks her colleagues, her ethicist colleagues and her physician colleagues, why they're silent about those uh, situations in the world, places like Sudan, Yemen, Timor, Tigray, wherever it may be, they usually confess ignorance. But when I ask colleagues about their silence on Gaza, more often than ignorance, they confess that they fear wading into something complicated and political. And she goes on to say that that's understandable, especially because of all the backlash that people can receive. But she asks kind of bluntly, are we ethicists or not? A complicated, uncomfortable, and political ethical problem is still an ethical problem. Will we be able to say we did what we could? The medics of Gaza are doing their jobs at risk of death, and we need to step up and do ours. Gandhi made a similar point, just more succinctly, many years earlier, just saying that the massacre of innocent people is a serious matter. It's not a thing to be easily forgotten, and it is our duty to cherish their memory. Well, one way that you cherish the memory of someone who is a victim is to obtain justice for the crime that was done to them. So this is a picture of Hersh Goldberg Polin. He's a former IDF soldier and a dual American Israeli citizen. He was kidnapped from the Ray Music Festival after having his arm traumatically amputated, probably by a grenade attack. And he was found dead in a tunnel in August 31st of last year, probably executed by his captors to prevent his rescue by Israeli special forces. Hundreds of news articles have been written about him. Every American who pays any attention to the news knows who he is, and has seen the really horrifying story of his kidnapping, his murder. President Biden called his mother and father apparently on a weekly basis, and they both spoke at the Democratic National Convention on the main stage the same day that I spoke way away from the main stage. And the U.S. government has actually issued charges against 5 of the Hamas leaders thought to be involved in his murder. They're all dead, but that's a different matter. All of this can be learned on Hersh's Wikipedia page. And just to emphasize, all of that is appropriate. That is an appropriate response to a young person cut down in the middle of their life for nothing that had anything to do with them. But this is a picture of Abdul Rahman al Najjar. He was a 21-year-old third-year medical student when I worked with him for 2 weeks in Gaza. He had been kidnapped as well at the beginning of the war by Israeli forces and quickly released. He told a story that was probably a little bit of bravado, but nevertheless he told it, in which when he was released, the Israeli soldier talking to him told him, "You're just an Arab. You'll never be a doctor." And he said, "No, I will be a doctor. And in fact, I'll be an excellent one." Those blue scrubs that he's wearing there were the only thing I ever saw him wear. In 2003, Abdul Rahman was born under occupation. From the time he was 4 years old, he lived in a blockaded concentration camp. At age 5, he survived the 22 days of death and destruction of Operation Cast Lead. At age 11, he survived the 51 days of Operation Protective Edge. At age 15, he witnessed the most shocking repression in the gunning down of the protesters in the Great March of Return, which we didn't even get to talk about. At age 18, he then went to medical school. It's kind of a shocking thing that somebody could still have any humanity left in them at that point. At age 20, his medical school was obliterated physically. And at age 21, he was murdered when his bomb was dropped in the house that he was staying in with him and his uncle. The state that killed him certainly doesn't recognize him as a human being, and this state that arms that state also doesn't recognize his killing as a crime. No news story in English has ever been written about him, even though I've pointed his case out to many journalists. He doesn't have a Wikipedia page, and like I said, our own government does not recognize his murder as being a crime. And we'll just end on this. In November of 1990, Swedish novelist Henning Mankell was in Mozambique observing the atrocities that the apartheid-era South African government was conducting during its invasion of the country. He was walking towards a village that had been destroyed by the US-backed anti-communist forces when he saw a young man walking toward him in rags. And in his words, I'm quoting him, "I will never forget what I saw next. He had painted shoes onto his feet. He had mixed paint from the soil, and to preserve his dignity for as long as possible, he had painted shoes on his feet. He had no boots, no shoes, nothing, not even sandals made from the remains of a car tire. As he had no shoes, he had to make some for himself. So he painted shoes on his feet. In doing so, he boosted his awareness that despite his misery and destitution, he was a human being deserving of dignity." For those of us who have witnessed scenes of cruelty and degradation around the world, Mankell's words can bring up difficult and sometimes painful memories. In this case, the surgical nurse just out of the frame was showing my colleague Amr something on his phone. And afterwards, I asked him why his case was tape and a marker. And he explained that when he was taken by Israeli forces from Shifa Hospital, they quickly let him and most of his colleagues go. And the commander of that unit made clear to the soldiers that they were not to destroy the Palestinian cell phones. So instead, when the commander left, the soldiers lined the Palestinians up, told them to take the cases off of their phones, smashed the cases, and then dropped their phones on the ground and walked away. But despite his destitution, he remains a human being with dignity. And in order to boost awareness of this and refusing to submit to his dehumanization, he also painted shoes on his feet. Thanks. Yeah. Sorry, I know it's not an uplifting talk. It's medical supply chain. So when I went in, oh,
How do you get medical supplies in?
yeah, so when I went in March of last year, the Rafah border hadn't been taken, so the Rafah gate was still open. That's the border between Gaza and Egypt. And actually, I took about 850 pounds of supplies, which, believe me, on British Airways is not easy. And I gave about 250 pounds more to a colleague of mine who was leaving from a town just north of where I live. Mark Perlmutter, who was there with me, took about 700 pounds of orthopedic implants. Basically, everybody brought hundreds of pounds of stuff, and we just put it in vans and went. The Egyptians didn't really mind. Now, John and I were talking about this earlier at lunch. Now the situation is quite different because Gaza is basically hermetically sealed off by the Israeli military now. The only way in or out is through Israel. So so in terms of medical supplies specifically, like I said, nothing has been allowed in or out since March 2nd. Literally nothing. Not a morsel of food, not a suture, nothing. Not a drop of water. Literally nothing. And when the Israelis agree to transport you from the Allenby Bridge or the King Hussein Bridge over to the Kerem Shalom crossing in southern Gaza, they have plenty of restrictions. The first is that you're only allowed to take $280 with you, which is completely ridiculous. Leaving aside that no explanation for it at all. The bus ride from Allenby to Kerem Shalom costs about $100. And then the bus ride within Gaza costs about $35. So you're already talking, and you have to do that twice, obviously, because you got to get out. So that's already $270. So they're saying for 3 weeks, you have $10 in a land under famine where, and I'm not making this up, eggs cost more than $2 each by the time I left. This is completely absurd, you know? So there's and the other thing they say is that you can't bring any medical supplies with you. You can bring your own medications, and that's it. Some surgeons have brought in individual small instruments that, you know, like vascular surgeons tend to like their own Castro forceps, for example. But other than that, you're not allowed to bring anything in. And the explanation for why is actually kind of funny. They say that because you're entering Israeli territory, you must adhere to Israeli tourism restrictions. It's completely ridiculous. Now, it must have been October 9th or something like that of 2024. On October, I think it was October 2nd that my New York Times article came out about what medical workers from the U.S. had seen while in Gaza. We talked about the shooting of children in the head. We talked about starvation, et cetera, et cetera. Right after it was the Sunday after that article came out, the Biden administration, it was Antony Blinken and Austin, the secretaries of state and defense, sent their counterparts in Israel, Dermer and Gallant at the time, a letter pointing out, amongst many other things, pointing out how ridiculous the restrictions on medical teams coming in were. But why can't I take suturin? It's not, you know, it doesn't make any sense. Despite the letter and despite them saying that they had to resolve these issues, they just ignored it. And you know, it's important to remember that, yeah, they ignored it, but then also Biden and Blinken and Austin didn't do anything. You know, they didn't say, oh, well, you're not listening to what we told you, so therefore no more bombs, no more tanks, no more whatever, which means they weren't serious about it in the first place, you know. So how do we take medical supplies? Now you can't, and the hospitals will run out of medical supplies very quickly. Yeah, could go on for a while, but maybe another question would be better.
Only, okay. Thank you. And I know that that was just a couple of your patients. How do you stay sane?
You know, honestly, I'm a trauma surgeon. I'm used to seeing people in pain and hurt. It's not the it's actually not the. I mean, you know, in Gaza, it's a lot more kids than I deal with in the U.S. for sure, and of course, the volume of people is much. I'm seeing way more patients in Gaza, but it's not it's not the injury to them that kind of hurts my soul or like motivates me to come talk to people like you. It's the fact that we're responsible for it. That's the issue. This is not an Israeli attack on Gaza. It's a U.S. Israeli attack on Gaza. What has been done to Gaza could not possibly have been done by the state of Israel. Israel is a small, resource-poor country in the middle of the Middle East. It's not some wealthy powerhouse of, you know, innovation or technology without the United States attached to it, or I should say the other way around, without being attached to the United States. The U.S. is where all of the arms come from. Despite what people say, Israel basically has no domestic military industry of any importance that doesn't rely. Like just a good example, there is a company called Israeli Military Industries, IMI. They make most of Israel's bullets. They make the tank shells that their Merkavas fire, things like that. You know where its management headquarters is? It's in Washington, D.C. because they know where the money comes from. It's pretty straightforward. Elbit Systems just opened a new plant in Charleston, South Carolina, where they build drones and other such, you know, instruments of death. So none of this has anything to do with. It doesn't have to do with the fact that children are being hurt. Like kids get hurt in a war. I mean, that's not surprising. But this isn't. This is something different. It doesn't explain. You know, war doesn't explain the dramatic level of death and destruction that we've seen in the Gaza Strip. There's just like I mentioned, there's just nothing like this has ever been done to a territory this size. So how do I stay sane? I don't know, by coming and talking to you, I guess.
Dr. Sidhwa, during all this time that you've spent there, have you seen evidence of Hamas fighters or stores of their weapons in the hospitals, which I think is one of the main reasons Israel has given for bombing the hospitals?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'll mention a few things about that. To answer the question clearly, no, never. On March let's say I got there on March 6th. It was probably March 8th or 9th, which was during the ceasefire. I saw 2 armed men in the back of a pickup truck drive into the gate of the hospital, drive through the courtyard, and drive out. That was literally the only time I ever saw armed people in the hospital. Or not even just armed people, but people who even seemed to have any military authority, whether they were armed or not. Now, I just want to talk about one example in some detail, because I think it illustrates how completely ridiculous this whole, not that I know you weren't arguing or not trying to imply otherwise, but the whole line of argument is completely and totally idiotic. On March 18th, I took care of a 16-year-old boy named Ismail Barhoum. I mentioned him already when I mentioned that I was almost killed at Nasser Hospital. So he's a 16-year-old kid. So he was bombed in his tent. I took care of him fine. On March 23rd, he's ready to go home. But I said, stupidly, it turns out that, oh, we'll just wait until tomorrow to discharge him. Well, a few hours before that, unbeknownst to me, because why would I know, another man from the Barhoum family, they were distant cousins, named Ismail Barhoum, came in. Now, Israel alleges that Ismail Barhoum was the prime minister of Gaza. I'm pretty sure that would have been news to him because his predecessor had only been assassinated 5 days earlier, but that's leaving aside the point. There are 2 possibilities under international law. When Ismail Barhoum, the older man, the man who was targeted later in Nasser, when he was attacked on March 18th or 19th and wounded, either he was a combatant or he was not a combatant. It's one of the 2. If he was not a combatant, then targeting him was illegal to begin with, right? If he was a combatant, then targeting him after he's already wounded and out of combat, the term in international law is hors de combat, it was then illegal. The oldest parts of international humanitarian, literally the oldest part, the first Geneva Convention was signed in 1864, which, just to give you some ideas, the year before the end of the American Civil War. It's pretty long ago. In other words, we still had slaves in this country when this convention was signed. The first Geneva Convention is about the protection of wounded combatants, not civilians, wounded combatants. And people who are wounded in war and are no longer participating in combat are not targets anymore. No state proposes dismantling this. Nobody claims otherwise. Because just think about the ramifications. Can Hamas bomb every hospital in Israel? Does anyone accept that as legitimate? Of course not. It's insane. It's completely outrageous. Take an even more extreme example, maybe. Like I mentioned, Israel claimed that this guy, Ismail Barhoum, was the new prime minister of Gaza. Okay, fine. Is he a legitimate military target? That's one question. Well, let's ask. Benjamin Netanyahu had his prostate removed, I think it was December 27th of last year, and he was in a civilian hospital in Jerusalem. Does anyone, and by every account, he was running the war from his hospital room the day after his operation. You know, he had meetings with his generals. So he militarized the hospital for sure. Does anyone think Hamas could bomb the hospital to try and kill him? Would anyone accept that? I wouldn't. There's doctors there. There's other patients there. They have nothing to do with this. Hospitals are protected spaces, again, under the oldest provisions of international law. Provisions that go back to when Europeans were still killing each other like Europe was a charnel house. And even then they recognized, oh, we better stop doing this stuff. That's pretty bad. Hospitals, ambulances, nurses, doctors, patients are protected people. So when the Israelis bombed the hospital and they said we were killing Ismail Barhoum, and they patted themselves on the back and congratulated themselves, literally there's no discussion of this in the American press. You know, in the foreign press there was some, but nothing in the American press. No one pointed out, just because Hamas was in the headline of every, the BBC headline was originally something like Israel strikes Hamas in hospital or something like that, and people got pretty upset about that, so the BBC actually changed the headline. But almost nobody in the Western press just pointed out that it was, even if they were striking a Hamas guy in the hospital, it was still illegal. Leaving aside that it was ludicrously reckless. They also killed a 16-year-old boy, and they almost killed me. That's just completely outrageous, But leaving aside that, now just to answer your question more directly, I'm just one guy, right? I could easily have been. I now don't speak Arabic. I'm not Palestinian. I'm not Arab. I'm not Muslim. I'm not Christian. I'm not Israeli. I'm not Jewish. I have nothing in conflict with the Middle East, just by ethnically or anything else. So maybe I just don't know. Maybe I just didn't see it. But me and 98 other American healthcare professionals who've worked in Gaza, plenty of whom are either American-born or immigrants to the United States, are of Arab descent, are Muslim, are Christian, do speak Arabic, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, they are part of the culture. And all of us, all 99 of us, wrote to Biden and Blinken and the whole rest of the administration and Harris. And we told them explicitly we never once saw anything that could even be remotely interpreted as militarization of a hospital in Gaza. And beyond that, in times, there's a reason that reporters are not allowed into Gaza by Israel, foreign reporters, because they would just check these things. And so just take it, you you remember Israel also bombed the hell out of Lebanon recently, right? Back in what was it, I guess September and October of last year was when the bombing really escalated, if I remember correctly. But during the bombing, I don't know if anybody remembers this. There's a major hospital in Beirut. I forget the name of it. It is owned by Hezbollah's charitable network, but it is also a hospital, right? It's not a hospital for combatants. It's a hospital for civilians, right? Even if it was a hospital for combatants, it wouldn't matter. Does anybody remember what the Israelis said, why they were going to destroy this hospital? Yeah, there was something in the basement. Anybody remember what it was? They said it was money. They said Hezbollah is storing money under this hospital, which, okay, leaving aside, that doesn't mean you should bomb a hospital. It's completely ridiculous, right? The propaganda is just getting lazy at this point. It's completely idiotic. But beyond that, well, they do, exactly. But because it's Lebanon, the reporters can go wherever they want. So the BBC just sent a reporter and they said, here are the keys to the hospital, ma'am. Please go anywhere you like. And she did. She couldn't find anything. Because, of course, there's nothing there. Why would you hide money under a hospital? It's the worst, it's a terrible idea. Hospitals are civilian institutions. There's people going and coming all the time. So, yeah, so no, the claim that hospitals have been militarized in any way, shape, or form is completely ridiculous. And now I'll just add another caveat to this. Leonard Rubenstein is a professor of international law at Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. He and I just submitted a New York Times editorial. We'll see if they publish it. But in that article, the reason I wanted to write the article with him is because, in my estimation, I've read, I think, everything that's available in this everything's even remotely serious in the English language. I cannot find a single credible point of evidence showing that Hamas has ever militarized any healthcare institution during wartime with Israel. There is one instance after Operation Protective Edge, it was a few months later, where Hamas used an outpatient clinic at Shifa Hospital as a torture chamber, which of course is terrible. You shouldn't do that, but that's hardly militarization of a hospital. That's wrong because you're torturing people. In other words, it doesn't justify bombing the clinic, especially not 10 years later. Leonard, Dr. Rubenstein, or Professor Rubenstein, he's a lawyer by training, he is a little more conservative in his reading of the evidence. And he says, look, every single incident hasn't been investigated. It is theoretically possible that Hamas did militarize the hospital in this situation or that situation. But even still, and again, this guy is an expert in international law. He teaches at Johns Hopkins University. Even then, even if every claim that Israel makes were true, it still could not possibly justify what was done. And not just in one instance or the whole thing. Gaza's entire healthcare system has been destroyed. You know, the hospital I was in, we lived on the 4th floor and there was like a balcony. And the hospital, Nasser Medical Complex right now, at least functionally, is the biggest hospital in the Gaza Strip. Shifa technically is bigger, but it only has a few functioning beds and one operating room that's being run out of a dentist's office, apparently. So when I was up on the 4th floor balcony, if I looked to the west where the sun set and looked at the edge of the wall, there's a mass grave there. There were something like 400 bodies that were exhumed from that mass grave, apparently. The numbers it goes between 200 and 400. I've seen different reports, but it doesn't matter. There was a mass grave inside the hospital. If you look to the left, so I guess that's north, on the north end of the hospital, there's another mass grave right next to the morgue. Because during the siege of Nasser Medical Complex, which was last February and then again in March when they really destroyed the place, the people in the morgue, the morgue wasn't allowed to take bodies, I should say, to the graveyard that's a few hundred meters from the hospital. So they had to bury them in this shallow mass grave. Afterwards, they were able to exhume them and bury them in a proper way. But, you know, what possible militarization? You would have to believe that Hamas had turned the hospital into an arms factory for that to be justified. It's ludicrous. There might have been one Hamas guy walking around. Who cares? And then, beyond that, there's also this discussion of, oh, we found medications belonging to the hostages at the hospital. Okay, I mean, that's, I don't mean to be crude, but if the hostages needed medical treatment, should they not have been taken to a hospital? Like, nobody agrees with taking hostages. That's absolutely criminal. Nobody doubts that. But no doctor. Was the doctor supposed to fight Hamas when they brought a hostage to him, or was he supposed to treat the hostage? Of course, you provide doctors provide medical care to all people who need it, right? That's like, so, okay. I mean, if somebody forgot their medication, what are you going to do? It's got nothing to do with anything. It's completely crazy. So yeah, the whole idea that hospitals have been militarized is, as far as I can tell, without any publicly available evidence at all. And even again, like Professor Rubenstein says, even if it were true, it wouldn't justify what's been done to them. So it's a total non-starter.
Thank you for being here with us tonight and for the work that you do. Just a quick question. Based on what you and your colleagues have seen like on the ground, are there injuries that you kind of treat like from conventional munitions, or have you seen evidence of like things like white phosphorus or like depleted uranium or things like that?
So it would be very hard for me to know if depleted uranium weapons are being used or not. I don't have a Geiger counter or anything like that. There is a lot of uranium in Gaza's soils, apparently, according to engineering studies and things like that. It'd be surprising if they're not using DU weapons, because the U.S. and Israel's militaries both use them on a regular basis. It's in most tank shells. It's, and depleted uranium spalates and then goes into the environment and stays there forever. It's a total disaster. As far as white phosphorus, yeah, we did see white phosphorus burns, not this time that I was in Gaza, but the previous time. The two times that I was in Gaza were really quite different. The first time, when I was at European Hospital, there was a ground invasion of Khan Yunis going on. So there were Israeli troops everywhere. People couldn't move throughout the city easily, et cetera, et cetera. This time, when the bombing resumed on March 18th, there were no ground troops in Khan Yunis, so people could actually get to the hospital much more easily than they could have the first time I was there. I saw a lot more people who were actually bleeding to death this time than last time. But white phosphorus is essentially, I'm not an international, so I don't want to say something that isn't true, but from my understanding, white phosphorus is only legal when it's used as a screening, as a provision of a smoke screen for the movement of troops. Now, it's obvious that Israel uses it deliberately against civilian targets. Like, there's actually a very good Human Rights Watch report about this from the Operation Cast Lead in 2008 and 9 called Rain of Fire. It's absolutely terrifying to read, about the dropping of white phosphorus directly on schools, directly on shelters. It's completely insane stuff. So when there were ground troops in Khan Yunis, then the Israelis can at least say, oh yeah, we were just using it as cover for our troops. So then we saw white phosphorus burns, but this time I didn't. Yeah. But no, anybody who is interested in the way that Gaza is used as a testing ground for development of munitions, which is a very real thing. It's actually quite dastardly. There's a very good book about this. I think the fellow that wrote his name is Anthony Lowenstein, if I remember right. It's called The Gaza Laboratory. Yeah. He's a Jewish fellow from Australia, if I remember correctly. It's quite a good book. I think it's by Verso or OR Books. It's not from a big publisher, but it's worth reading. The details are pretty shocking. But if you're a weapons developer, it kind of makes sense. You've got a captive population, a lot of cameras everywhere, and nobody gives a damn what you do to them. Perfect place to find human subjects is inside an open air prison. Jeff Halper did, really? Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
I'd like to thank you for your work in Gaza,
Thanks.
and I think it's really admirable. Listening to your presentation, it just strikes me that what we're seeing is a failure that I think most of the people in this room cannot explain, and that is why this is continuing to happen after 16, 17 months. And I guess what I want to maybe ask two questions, because you mentioned a partner of yours, Perlmutter, and I guess I've seen both you and him on, maybe it's on Al Jazeera or Amy Goodman, describing some of the work that you were trying to do, convincing some of our so-called political leaders of what was going on. And the failure to stop this is something that it just grips me every single day, and I probably am speaking for everybody here. I wonder, and I just cannot for the life of me understand, for instance, why the medical establishment has not said anything about this assault on the medical infrastructure of Gaza, or why, for instance, universities have not made some kind of comment on the scholasticide. I wonder if you could tell me, have you given this presentation to medical schools, and what kind of reception do you get there? And just a related follow-up, you mentioned the letter to Blinken, and have you ever been able to tell them firsthand about what you have experienced and what some of the reaction you've gotten from our political leadership about some of this, of what you have told us this evening?
Yeah. So let me just I'll try to remember as much of it as I can. So in terms of I think it is giving I think it's I don't think you're doing this on purpose, but I think saying that we've failed to stop this is probably an incorrect way of framing it in our minds. We are active participants in this. It's like asking someone who's like actively robbing a store, hey, why are you failing to stop robbing this store? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, that's not, I know you weren't trying to say it this way, but we are actively, I hate the term complicit. People say the US is complicit in Israel's crimes. I think it's technically correct. I've looked at the definition a bunch of times just because it irks me. But so I think it's technically correct. But when the phrase, when the sentence is spoken, the United States is complicit in Israel's crimes. No. The U.S. and Israel are co-conspirators in these crimes. That it's crucial to understand this. The jet fuel, the bombs, the airplanes, the training for how to fly those airplanes. Most of the components of a Merkava tank that are important, the Merkava is Israel's giant tank. It's kind of like an M1 Abrams tank, but bigger. The D9 bulldozers, the jet fuel, if I didn't mention it already, a ton of the intelligence, both the aerial and human intelligence, all of this comes from the United States. So the question is why, right? Like, what do we, I hate this question, but what do we get out of it? Well, you and I don't get anything out of it. In fact, it probably makes us a lot more likely to die in terrorist attacks at some point. But the American power gets a lot out of destroying the Palestinians. This is an important point to realize. It's not that we're being dragged along. It's not that the Zionist lobby convinced some, that's not what's going on. The US has been controlling the Middle East by force since World War II. And it has every plan of continuing to do that indefinitely. Well, okay, I mean, the Palestinians are an impediment to that, just for obvious reasons. They just don't go along with it. And furthermore, Israel is a major linchpin of that system. It has been since 1967. It's a longer history, I guess. But and so that's just the situation. So just to kind of tie it in, so I haven't been able to speak to Blinken or Austin or Biden directly, or Harris. We asked them repeatedly for a meeting, and I have to say it's pretty unusual for 100 health. The second letter we sent them in October of last year had 99 signatures to be accurate, but it's pretty unusual for almost 100 doctors and nurses to write to the President of the United States and say, we witnessed atrocities being committed with American weapons by a major American ally. In fact, by the most important American ally in the world, or the most prominent American ally in the world, and not even get a response. I literally, we were talking about this before. I literally received nothing in response to that letter, not even an acknowledgement of receipt of the letter. Even from the low-level National Security Council people I sent, like literally nothing. The first letter we sent in July last year, at least I got literally 2 responses from NSC staffers who don't do anything, but or not they don't do anything, but they don't have any actual power. But literally nothing from the entire foreign policy establishment of Congress and the executive department. That's pretty wild. That's pretty extreme. And the reason is because it's not a, like I mentioned before, it's not an Israeli attack. It's a U.S. Israeli attack. And that just explains the whole thing. Or sorry, I was going to explain. So I did meet with I don't know. I'm not sure if she's still, I'm not sure if Trump kept her on, so maybe I shouldn't say her name. But I did meet with a woman who has been very prominent in she's an ex-military officer, from what I understand. She's been very prominent in U.S. government-run humanitarian interventions in the world, and I mean like not armed intervention, like actual humanitarian interventions in evacuating people from Afghanistan after the pullout of troops and things like that. And she's very serious. She's a very, very serious person. She's very she's an American, kind of a standard liberal American apparatchik, but she's a serious person. She takes her job seriously in order to provide humanitarian care to people who need it. And so I did get to meet with her, and I asked her during the meeting. I said, "Is it, I'm trying to understand. Do the people who are making these decisions ultimately, which it was widely reported, were Blinken, Biden, and Austin together. Like it was only those three. Everybody else in the administration apparently wanted to change course on this, not to free Palestine, but just to stop committing genocide there. So I asked her, I said, is it that the Biden, is it that Biden and Harris and Blinken and these people, is it that they don't know what the Israelis are doing, or is it that they've decided that they know, but okay, well, it's worth it. Well, for whatever reason, whatever, you have to ask them what the reasons are, but for whatever reason, it's worth it. She said, no, it's definitely the latter. Everybody knows. She said every time we have a meeting, and again, she meets with the president and, in a group regularly. Every time we have a meeting, your New York Times article is brought up and we say, sir, how could all of these and she said, your New York Times article, your Politico article, your letter to the president, which was an open letter. She said it's brought up at every meeting. No one denies it. Like Brett McGurk doesn't sit there and say Feroze Sidhwa was a liar. That's just not the case. But they've just, oh well, if everyone in Gaza has to die so that the U.S. can continue controlling the Middle East by force, well, that's what has to happen. You got to remember the U.S. is, it's maybe not pleasant to remember. When the U.S. signed the Genocide Convention under Reagan, if you go and look at the caveat, there's what's the technical term in international law? I'm blanking on it. Sorry. But when countries sign a treaty, they can enter caveats. Then the Reagan administration entered 4 such things when it signed the Convention on the Prevention and the Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. And if you read them, it basically says that this convention doesn't apply to the United States. When during the Bush administration, actually, there was a moment, because torture became the big, for people who are old enough to remember, the United States started basically just kidnapping people from anywhere in the world, anywhere they liked, and carrying out what's called extraordinary rendition, basically what Donald Trump did to those Venezuelan folks recently, basically just picking them up and sending them to a foreign torture chamber so that they could be abused and mistreated, maybe executed, with no recourse, just absolutely no recourse. It was all done in secret. Well, this became public, and then it was this big debate in the media: should we torture people or not? And one legal scholar wrote a piece, I think it was in the New York Times actually, or maybe the Wall Street Journal, in which they said the United States claiming that it has, I'm paraphrasing, I can't remember the exact words, but it was 20 years ago. But the United States claiming that it has the right to torture is as ridiculous as the United States claiming that it has the right to commit genocide. But he didn't realize the irony is that the U.S. does claim the right to commit genocide. It's quite literally in the signing statement. It's pretty shocking. We have a lot of work to do in our own society in terms of our level of culture, our level of just basic human decency. And a lot of it we don't even realize, honestly. I mean, a lot of it's this is a very indoctrinated society. And it's hard to figure a lot of this stuff out, I just happen to have been reading about it for 20 something years now. So I happen to know some things, but it's just, it's pretty shocking. And yeah, so, so when we ask why haven't we stopped it, it's because again, we want to stop it. So do 80-90% of Americans, and it would be 99.999% of Americans if people actually knew what was going on, which is why so much effort is taken to hide the fact from them. You know, nobody. What person do you know walking around that would be like, yeah, no, I don't mind if Israeli soldiers shoot children in the head and we pay for it. That's fine. Nobody would, almost nobody, right? Almost nobody. And furthermore, the one who says, yeah, no, screw those Arabs, I don't care. Yeah, take them and show them the child shot in the head and then see what they say. You know, there's a reason that so much effort is made. Such a massive amount of money is spent to pull the wool over people's eyes, to make them think that basic things that are perfectly obvious are not happening. So I think that's all the reason together. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So the question was, what is in terms of engaging with medical societies? So there have been here I have to defend the medical societies a little bit and dump on my own fellow doctors. The physicians who have wanted medical societies to make statements, in my opinion, and everybody has their own, their right to do whatever they want, but in my opinion, I think they've really gone about it the wrong way. They've, instead of going to medical societies with a clear ask that could be easily operationalized, is also sound in principle. Instead of doing that, they've kind of demanded that, like, the American Medical Association condemn genocide in Gaza. Now that'd be nice if they did that, but everybody knows they're not going to. That's just totally off the wall. It's not because it isn't happening or it isn't true, but like when has a medical society ever condemned genocide? When did American medical associations condemn apartheid even? Not really, actually. You can't really find much there. So instead, what we're doing now, I'm involved in quite a few different efforts. Instead of that, what we're focusing on now is specifically getting American medical institutions, or not institutions, not like individual hospitals, but American professional societies. Like for me, it's the American College of Surgeons, for example. Or the American Emergency Medical Association, things like that. These professional societies where doctors all get together to acknowledge that the two worst countries in the world for attacks on humanitarian healthcare workers are Gaza and Ukraine. And we're trying to combine those two politically, or we're trying to combine those two in these statements for obvious political reasons. It's much easier to condemn, everybody wants to say, oh yeah, we condemn Russia and Ukraine. And then like, oh, but they're saying we have to condemn Gaza too. Oh boy, what's going to win out, our patriotism or our hatred of Arabs? I don't know. But really, I mean, this is kind of the crazy, but again, we live in a weird society, it's not pleasant to think about, but like, it is what it is. So I'll tell you that 90% of physicians that actually, I was just at the International College of Surgeons meeting, maybe, I don't know, I think it was about 2 weeks ago. It was just right after I got back from Gaza. And it was in Charleston. That's how I learned about the Elbit plan. And so when I went there, I gave basically this talk, but much faster. I gave it in 12 minutes. And afterwards, literally the entire conference wanted to talk to me about it. They were like, and not to challenge me on anything. How can we get medical societies to make a statement? How can we do this? How can we do that? How can I go volunteer, et cetera, et cetera. After all of that, one random guy who I've never met before, I have no clue who he is, found me literally the next day when no one else was around. He was like, I hear, he was European. I can't do his accent, but he was like, I heard your talk yesterday, but the problem is Hamas. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, why do you think that? He was like, everybody knows they steal the water pipes and turn them into rockets. I was like, are you sure about that? I mean, have you ever seen a water pipe? It's not exactly something you can make fly. Like, this isn't, what are you talking about? This is completely silly. And, but he just wanted to keep saying it's Hamas. And then he finally walked away. So, okay, fine. But that's literally one guy at the entire conference. It's not that it's not that physicians want children to be massacred. Is completely, it's kind of, at least I hope not. Are there some? Yeah, probably. But that's not the issue. The issue is the level of intimidation, the level of concern. These medical societies are institutions of the elites, right? They're not for the people or something. They're for pretty wealthy people like me, doctors, surgeons. their main job is actually to make sure that doctors just get wealthier. Like that's basically the number. No, I'm not. They don't deny it. They always say ensuring fair compensation, right? But really, just to make sure doctors get richer all the time. Fine. If they want to do that, that's fine. Everybody has the right to argue in a democratic society, I guess, or to try and argue for their point of view. But they also proclaim principles. Right. And medical neutrality, like I said, goes back to 1864. It's not a new concept. We shouldn't be throwing it out. And furthermore, the American military, it's not like it doesn't deploy around the world all the time. Right. Do we really want medical neutrality to go away so that foreign forces can start attacking American physicians? And I don't think that's a good idea either, even just from the standpoint of self-preservation. So attacking that problem from those standpoints, instead of attacking it from the problem of like, we want you to condemn genocide, they're going to be like, look, we're not legal scholars. We can't condemn genocide. Leave us alone. And I have to be honest, I actually think that's a sensible stance on their part. So I just think it's been done the wrong way. And I think that one major problem is for people who have been involved in this, for people who I was 18 when the second Intifada broke out in 2000. I just started college at Johns Hopkins. It was the big thing on campus. I was joking with John that the prettiest girls were in Amnesty International, so I went there. And I just ended up learning about it, and I stuck with it, right? So now I've edited books on the topic for University of California Press or books in London. So I happen to know something about it. Anybody who knows something about this knows that the targeting of hospitals, of paramedics, of ambulances, of physicians, of nurses, of patients is nothing new in the Israel-Palestine conflict. Nothing. In 1978, I guess it was, or maybe 79, the Arab states, what were called the confrontation states, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and Lebanon, introduced a Security Council resolution, because I think Syria had the presidency of the Security Council that year. They introduced a resolution calling for a two-state solution, right? Calling for official U.S. policy to be implemented, in other words, at the time. The U.S. vetoed the resolution. I think they did it again the next year, if I remember correctly. But do you know, Israel didn't have a seat at the Security Council and doesn't have a veto, obviously. So you know what they did? They just bombed the Children's Hospital in Beirut. They bombed the psychiatric ward of the Children's Hospital. There's a very famous picture of a young nurse. I don't know her name, but a young nurse with short hair holding a child who's obviously syndromic. She has, some sort of genetic deficiency, who's just screaming in this room that's been obliterated. Why didn't American physicians at the time get their societies to condemn that? You see what I mean? Like we're going back, like we're trying to make up for like 50 years of missed time. You know what I mean? Like these things should all have been condemned when they happened. And that would have taken American physicians to actually care about the world, which, I shouldn't be too harsh. They do. But they're also busy. They've got their own, just like everybody else, they've got their own thing going on. Some of you are physicians. I mean, you remember working. It's tough. But yeah, so I think I do think that medical societies can be moved, or at least I shouldn't. Maybe they can, maybe they can't. But I'm certainly still trying, and so are a lot of other people. People who've been in Gaza, I've also worked in Ukraine 3 times since the Russian invasion, and that kind of gives a lot of us a credibility when it comes to, especially something like the American College of Surgeons, where everybody's all caught up with military and war, and it's like, oh, you went and worked in a military conflict zone, but without the protections of the military. Well, it's okay. They'll listen. Yeah, we'll see what can actually get done.
Hi. Well, first, thank you so much for everything, for your courage, for what you have been doing in Gaza, for your research, your meticulous, amazing presentation. And for someone who is Palestinian, and I breathe and live the genocide every minute of my days, I still learned a lot. So thank you so much first for the presentation and for all your work. And I have a question, but before, I just want to say that we are in the belly of the beast, of course, and we are in the empire. So absolutely, we are running the show. We are running the show. And if people paid attention, on October 20th of 2023, Biden said it, and it was reported in the news as just regular news when he was, giving the $14 billion at that time. Then they went up, of course, and up and up. But he said it that this is not a free giveaway. This is our chance to replenish our military arsenal and to create jobs. And he literally said that. This was 1 week after the start of the genocide. So the agenda was very clear. The political economy of genocide was very clear, and and there was interest in this country actually to push forward with the genocide. And also just about the issue of Hamas and using Hamas as an excuse with the hospitals. I mean, I can't understand how there is any single person in the world who can't see the clear intentions here. You flatten a whole area, that has never happened in history. You hit every single university, shell them from the second month of the genocide. Every single hospital, several times. Every time people rebuild, you shell it again. You bombard. 92% of Gaza is destroyed. So the intention is very clear. Number one is to, of course, brutal punishment, so no one can ever even think, to transpass or, whatever, to attack, especially the Arab countries around also included, to show this brutal military force and punish Palestinians severely. But also, because it's part of the constant genocide since 1948. So it's just another way to make Gaza unlivable. And I can't see, I don't understand how people still actually fall into the trap of the Hamas excuse. I just wanted to say that. But my question for you is, are you going back? Do people go back? Is it only medical teams that are allowed? If you could give us an idea if maybe other people are interested in going and serving, if they could. Thank you again.
Yeah. So other than international agencies like UNICEF or CARE or Save the Children, other than that, as far as I know, it's only, and other than Israeli soldiers, the only people that get in to Gaza right now are medical teams, as far as I understand. I could be wrong about that, though. I honestly don't know. And I don't know how you volunteer with UNICEF or CARE or something like that. But they have if anybody, there's no, and I don't mean to be, I'm not saying that to be dismissive of it. If you actually want to work with UNICEF or CARE or Save the Children or the WHO, like these places hire human beings to work in them. So the like when we went from Amman to into Gaza, like from Jordan over into Gaza, the EMT or the medical personnel were only a small part of the convoy. The rest of it was UN personnel, like I said, CARE, Save the Children, UNICEF, UNESCO, whoever. So that's one thing. So just to answer the question, there's if anybody, I know the New York Review of Books is kind of a bougie thing to reference, but the in the New York Review of Books, so Omar Bartov is almost certainly the most important living Holocaust scholar. He's an Israeli Jewish fellow who works at Brown University. He's the chair of I forget if he's the chair of Jewish studies, the chair of Holocaust and genocide. I think he's the chair of genocide and Holocaust studies there. But anyway, like I said, he's certainly the most important. Omer Bartov, Omerbartov, I'm pretty sure is his last name. He has been, so he's had a very interesting evolution. In November of 2023, just a month after the attacks, he wrote an article in the New York Times in which he said, what is going on is absolutely horrendous, but he didn't think it was genocidal at the time. This is November of 2023. A few months later, he wrote a very, very long piece in The Guardian, which is very worth reading. The Guardian's free. It's very, very worth reading. I'm sure he sent that to the New York Times and they said no, just to give you an example. But in The Guardian, he wrote why exactly his thinking had changed. And now he was actually quite convinced that it was genocidal. But he just wrote a piece in the New York Review of Books. Actually, I think the print edition would come out in 2 days. But and in it, it's the New York Review of Books is always a review of books, right? So it's technically a review of Atef, I forget the guy's last name, but he wrote a book called Don't Look Left. Yeah, that sounds correct. Yeah. He wrote a book called Don't Look Left. It's very interesting reading. It's terrifying reading, actually. About, he's actually a Palestinian Authority person of some sort, and he was just visiting Gaza on October 7th, I think to open like an art studio or something, and then of course the attack happened and he couldn't leave, and he was with his son, and the story is very worth reading for a few reasons. Number one is it really humanizes these people. The way he talks about the hunger, the way he talks just everything, it's very hard reading. But the way I don't know if anybody's ever read Primo Levi's biography from or autobiography, I guess, from his time at Auschwitz. But it is I think it was Auschwitz. I can't remember now. But it is very it's a humanizing read, and this book works the same way. It's called Don't Look Left. He also wrote a book about the 2014 Operation Protective Edge. I think it's called The Drone Eats With Me or something like that. Also very worth reading. But anyway, the Bartov's article in the New York Review book starts off with a brief history about the Herero people of Namibia. This is a tribe that I'd never heard of this before he read it or before he wrote about it. This is a tribe of about 80,000 people, I believe, who were basically exterminated by the German settlers to what became known as Namibia now. It was the first, the way Bartov describes it, and again, he's an expert in these things, it was the first genocide of the 20th century. And that genocide started just because you were saying the Hamas excuse, right? Because obviously, you know, when most people, including me, honestly, like most people, when they hear that Hamas is just an excuse, they think, well, but October 7th happened. I mean, it was an awful, you know, it was a massive atrocity, no doubt about that. But so he points out that the German settlers were constantly encroaching on Herero grazing lands, and this was leading to starvation amongst their people and other such things. So eventually they went on the attack and they killed a whole bunch of Germans, mostly unarmed people, you know, right? And then the Germans exterminated them. Well, that's not an uncommon way that these things work, you know. It's I know it seems ridiculous to say, but if the natives keep their heads down and do whatever they're told and go where they're told and leave when they're told, why kill them? It's kind of, you know, killing people takes effort. It leads to all sorts of bad press. Yeah. Okay. I mean, you know, it's, yeah. If like you see this on like social media all the time. Why doesn't Hamas just surrender? Well, okay. I mean, you could ask the same thing about Israel. Why doesn't Israel just surrender? It's a stupid question. But the point is that's not, the Palestinians are not being, the reason I gave so much detail about Gaza before October 7th of 2023 is because it happens to be relevant, you know. It wasn't like Gaza was some flower garden or something. It was a disaster zone. You know, there's an American military man named E.L.M. Burns, who I think in 1955 or 56, he was monitoring the armistice line between Israel and Egypt when Egypt was occupying Gaza. He describes Gaza in his memoir of the time as something like a concentration camp. When Senator, everybody knows Al Gore, he was the vice president and then he ran for president. His father was an American senator. He went to Gaza I think maybe a year or something after the 1967 war. And he came back and on the Senate floor described Gaza as a concentration camp. In maybe 2000 or 2001, the George Weiss professor of sociology at Hebrew University of Jerusalem, Baruch Kimmerling, he's died since then, but one of Israel's leading academics, wrote a book about it's called Politicide, Ariel Sharon's War on the Palestinians. He describes Gaza as the largest concentration camp ever to exist. Giora Eiland, who is an extreme right-wing Israeli military man, he was the head of Israel's National Security Council, and now he's the head of the Civilian Advisory Board to the Israeli War Cabinet. He's the guy, if you've read about the general's plan in the media, he's the general. He's the guy that came up with it. He described Gaza in leaked cables that came out from the WikiLeaks revelations. He described Gaza in 2004, if I'm remembering correctly, as a huge concentration camp. So you're talking about people who have been living in something that, you know, I mean, you know, E.L.M. Burns probably, I don't know for sure, but he probably fought in World War II, right? Al Gore's father it's not like these people are idiots, right? Or can they really not tell what a concentration? Just to be clear, there's a difference between a death camp like Auschwitz and a concentration camp, right? Those are different. There's no gas chambers at a concentration camp. They all recognize this place for what it was. Okay, I mean, yeah. So if you're putting people into a concentration camp, it's hard to. It's like I said, if they just keep their heads down and just pace the walls of the concentration camp until they die, well, yeah, then we won't kill. Then the Israelis wouldn't kill them. But of course, these things engender resistance, and that's not to justify October 7th. What would, like I already said, it was a horrendous crime. But it's just that these things you can't treat people like, if you treat people like animals, eventually some of them will act like animals. That's not that hard to see. I mean, we can all, like, just imagine. A lot of you probably have children, or maybe, and that's I feel like the front room has children, and the back of the room is younger people. But but for those of you who have children, or for those of you who are in college here, just imagine, like what I mentioned about Abdul Rahman was literally true. At age 4, he was born into a concentration camp. Abdul Rahman was the young man that the third year medical student who was killed that I worked with. He was born into a concentration camp. He lived his entire life in it. He went to medical school in a concentration camp. Then his medical school in the concentration camp was physically destroyed, blown up. And then he was blown up. What kind of, how is his family going to rationalize this? How is his family going to tell his brother? I don't know if he has a brother, but I'm just making it up. But how is his family going to tell his brother on October 7th of 2033, no, you shouldn't go kill people in Israel? He'd be like, what are you talking about? You remember what they did to Abdul Rahman? You remember what they did to everyone else? It's just outrageous. These just aren't. This is just the way things work. If, again, violence engenders violence, and that's again why I say that I don't. We should be willing to appreciate the fact that nothing we're doing is terribly pro-Israel, in my opinion. I lived in Israel for a year after college. Actually, when I graduated, I went and lived in Haifa, and I worked with an Arab Jewish cooperative there. Haifa is the only mixed Arab Jewish city in Israel. So I actually have quite an appreciation for, at least for the leftist secular part of Israeli society that I was hanging out. I quite enjoyed it, actually. I don't want to see Israeli society destroyed. But is this, do we see, is turning Israel into a place that runs a concentration camp for decades, bombs the hell out of it, murders children en masse? Is that pro-Israel? Or are we turning Israeli society into something we should be proud of? I don't think so. We can hear you. It's okay. Yeah. Mhm.
Thank you for all of those. Well, she knows the secret. So thank you for all that work that you've done in so many different places. One of the places that you have volunteered and worked in is the West Bank.
Mhm.
Could you maybe share with us a little bit of what you did and what you observed about medical and public health conditions in the West Bank?
Yeah, so I was in the West Bank a long time ago. It was 2011 was the last time I was, no, 2010 was probably the last time I was there. So it's a long time ago. I'm actually hoping to go back in August, but we'll see if the Israelis let me go. So yeah, so honestly, from personal experience, no, I can't in the past, 15 years. But the area C of the part of the West Bank that's actually under direct Palestinian control is really just the cities, the main cities, Ramallah, Nablus, Jenin, well, not Jenin anymore, but at the current, so I can only tell you what I've been able to read in reports and in the news and stuff like that. But right now, the Israelis are depopulating the northern West Bank. The West Bank has been split into 4 military salients, like four completely disconnected military salients, and each one has been described. I'm not. This isn't my phrase. As a little Gaza. That's accurate. It's perfectly obvious what the plan has been. is just to divide Palestinian society in the West Bank. It's basically impossible to go from Jerusalem into the West Bank or vice versa. So the core of the cultural, economic, and social core of Palestinian society has been severed from the main body politic and from the main economic hubs and things like that. Ramallah has been turned into this kind of weird. Like the last time I was in Ramallah, the first time I was there was 2004. And then, like I said, the last time was 2011. And Ramallah changed dramatically. Ramallah became this absolutely posh, incredibly like there's restaurants with huge glass facades on the front and all sorts of. Yeah, I was like, where in the hell did this come from? Well, basically, when the Israelis kind of moved from a colonial to a neo-colonial arrangement in the West Bank, they basically turned the Palestinian Authority into their own army. There's actually a term for this. It's called the Dayton Army. Keith Dayton was an American, I think, lieutenant general or something. He's probably moved up since then. And he, John Kerry, organized after Arafat died. Kerry organized the Dayton Army. Or Kerry told Dayton to organize the Dayton Army. So basically, he just they trained a bunch of West Bank Palestinians under provisionally under the authority of the PA, but not, in reality, they were obviously responding to American commands, and to just suppress the West Bank. That in Operation Protective Edge and in Operation Cast Lead, the two previous massive attacks on Gaza, there were no protests in the West Bank, because they were just physically suppressed. Anybody who was planning one was just thrown in jail or beaten or even killed by the Palestinian security services. This is not it's completely wild. But that's kind of standard in colonial history. Like the British didn't run India themselves. They got their local lackeys to do it. Actually, that's why my family happens to be wealthy in Pakistan, because they were British collaborators. Not them specifically, but like their people, the Parsis. So this is kind of a standard thing that colonial powers do. It's not that surprising. But no, it's a total disaster. And yeah, no, I couldn't tell you the specific details, but it is an absolute disaster, and it is going to get a lot worse, because the Israelis seem to have concluded that this 4 years is their go time. They are going to expel as many people as they can. They're going to kill as many people as they can, and they're going to destroy as much of the Palestinian West Bank as they can. But again, that's all. We don't have to. That's because we're letting them do it. It's not. It's again. It won't be an Israeli attack on the West Bank. It'll be a U.S.-Israeli attack on the West Bank. I shouldn't say it will be. It already is. It's been going on since October 7th. But it's really accelerating under Trump. Yeah. And what's wild is that reporters, American especially American reporters, they constantly claim that they can't report on Gaza because they're not allowed in. There's plenty of them in the West Bank. Are they reporting on it? Not hardly. It's kind of pathetic.
A question from a member of our audience, our online audience. Is there an opportunity to educate the future generations of doctors? Can the oath they take be changed to include the condemnation of genocides?
Yeah, I hope so. I don't know what it is, but yeah. I mean, I have I used to be a residency program director, so but again, it's just people should understand something. The term genocide is I don't have any problem using it, because I think in the way any normal human being thinks of genocide, this is genocidal, right? There's also the question of the technical legal determination, which I have no competence to judge. But but in the way any normal human being understands genocide, this is obviously genocidal. They've literally destroyed everything that keeps people alive in Gaza, and now we're just waiting for them to die. So yeah, so there are initiatives there are plenty of medical student initiatives, for example, to have physicians be more attuned to social responsibilities and the privileges of wealth and things like that. And yeah, no, hopefully they will continue to gather steam. And some of the younger people in this room might go to medical school, so remember.
Hi, thank you again for your presentation. You shared a lot about the data about the health of the general population and specifically children. And considering the lack of accessibility to clean drinking water, I was wondering if you could talk about your experience and your ability to perform surgery without, one, necessary or enough medical equipment, and two, the ability for patients to recover, considering the population's history with microbial resistance. And this can either be by referencing a particular case, or comparing like your first time around to the second time around, considering the escalation of the conflict?
Yeah, so the antimicrobial resistance, meaning bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics broadly, is a huge problem in Gaza, and the reason is because of the constant wounding of the population. Not since October 7th. There's actually good data on this, but at this point in time, there are no cultures available in Gaza. You can't do a microbial culture, so you have no idea what things are resistant to. You just give whatever antibiotic is available, and you hope it works, and it usually doesn't. But in the the great, I don't know if people know what the Great March of Return was, but from 2018 to about 2020, Palestinians gathered, mostly young people, gathered at the border fence, which is in an Israeli declared but totally nebulous buffer zone, and just kind of demanded that the world pay attention to them. Occasionally, they would make some kind of half-hearted attempt at destroying the fence, but it wasn't really a thing. For the first 6 months of this, the UN wrote a very good report on this. For the first 6 months, the atmosphere was festive. It was not a violent protest. There was no leaving aside what is a violent protest, but there was no shooting. There was no bombings. There weren't even even the kites that catch fire and burn crops or something. Nothing, literally nothing, that could be construed as violence. Well, the Israelis lined snipers up along the Israeli side of the fence, and for 6 months, this happened. This is a Friday. Every Friday, this would happen because Friday is the first day of the weekend. Every Friday, young people would gather. They would sing. They would dance. They would hold teach-ins. Nothing even remotely approaching violence. And for 6 months, Israeli snipers shot people in the knees or shot them dead. The Doctors Without Borders had a good report about this, where there was one surgeon, I forget his name. I think I can't remember, but I forget his name. But he said that he's had multiple patients shot in the left knee, brought in, got an amputation, insisted on going back to the protest afterwards, shot in the right knee, got an amputation, insisted on going back in a wheelchair, and then were shot dead. This this UN report is kind of shocking. What it reveals, and what I think it was from the Human Rights Council, but I don't remember. The Israeli and Israel insisted to the report's authors insisted that every single bullet that had been fired hit its intended target. So you can't say any of this was accidental. They targeted journalists, medics, women, children, and crippled people. That was the conclusion of the report. And it's like 250 pages of detail. Like, it's crazy what the detail, I can't even imagine how they figured it all out. But you can imagine the wounding of the population that this resulted in. So when you cause such huge soft tissue injuries to people, they often get infections, and especially when the populations, even back then, was quite malnourished. They didn't have access to protein sources on a regular basis. They were almost all anemic, et cetera, et cetera. So the doctors in Gaza would really heavily rely on whatever antibiotics they had around. But again, because they couldn't really do proper cultures, and because antibiotic provision was extremely inconsistent, it was just whatever Israel decided to allow in that week is what we have. This day we have ceftriaxone, tomorrow we have cefepime, the next day we have Ancef, the next day we have meropenem. Who the hell knows? So sorry for the people who aren't doctors in the room, that made no sense. But basically, so it engendered a huge amount of antibiotic resistance, some major problem. But what the solution to it is, stopping the slaughter would be one. But basically getting Gaza back to being a normal place where you can actually do some kind of infection control in the hospital. Now, the hospital, John and I were talking about this, the hospital situation was very different the first time and the second time I was there. When I was at European Hospital in March and April of 2024, the hospital itself was a displaced persons camp. There were 1,500. There were 10,000 people sheltering on the grounds of the hospital, like on the hospital's campus. But then within the hospital, lining the corridors, were 1,500 people, not patients, just 1,500 people in the hospital, just living there, because they had nowhere else to live, and living under a roof is better than living outside. There's electricity. It's you're a little bit protected from the environment, things like that. And then on top of that, there were 220 beds in this hospital. There were 1,500 people admitted to the hospital. So it was an enormous, I've never seen a hospital, I've never seen any building this crowded, to be honest. It was, and you can imagine infection control in this situation is completely impossible, leaving aside that antiseptics weren't even being allowed in at the time. Infection control was just totally impossible. And there were women draining, canned vegetables in the ICU sink. The OR, it was, like I mentioned before, I think, there were ground troops in Khan Yunis. The Israeli army was like physically in Khan Yunis, so it was impossible to walk through the city safely. So everybody who worked at the hospital basically lived there. So the OR staff lived in the operating room. The nurses lived on the floor. The physicians lived in their call rooms. 10 of them in one room. It was crazy. Like again, I'm the wealthy foreigner who's shown up. I was living in a room with 6 other people. That was, I don't know, certainly narrower than this stage and maybe half the length of it. Like it was completely nuts. So in that situation, it's totally impossible to have any. Then that's why I said talking about surgical success in this environment is ridiculous. It's just not going to happen. When I went back, so every hospital in Gaza has been forcibly deported. The population of the patients, everybody in the hospital has been forcibly deported from the hospital at some point, forcibly kicked out by the Israelis, forcibly displaced from the hospital, I guess is the way to say it. And the Ministry of Health and the local administrations have made a choice, and it's brutal, but I think it's the right choice, to be honest, just to not allow people to come back in the hospital, to camp there. As the situation gets worse and worse, who knows when that decision will break down. But the way I described it when I wrote that Politico article was it felt like a zombie apocalypse. Everyone's just sheltering in the one place that they can close off the outside world from. So it's a bad situation.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap it up because I need
Sorry,
to
I
take,
have a
no, no,
fly
I
to
need to take
Atlanta.
Dr. Sidhwa to the airport tonight. And I very much want to thank you for everything that you said, for all the work that you do, and for sharing that information with communities across the country,
Yeah.
because information is what gives us strength.
Yeah.
And the courage of what you're doing is really critical, and I very much appreciate it. Before we give him a round of applause, I just want to make a very quick announcement. One of our guests, let me put my glasses on so I can read the right dates. Chris Hedges is going to be in town. He'll be talking about his book, A Genocide Foretold, on Friday, May 30th at St. Paul's Cathedral. And if you want more information, there's a little QR code here. Be happy to pass it to you. Friday, May 3rd, St. Paul's Cathedral. And please, thank you so much, Feroze, and